women's ring in the women's bathroom, and it's at the registration desk because everyone thinks they lost them. But besides that, thanks for holding tight. I'm just going to give it straight to you, Nathan. Thanks for being here.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. Before I get started, I have to address Michael's comment, because when it popped up there, he noticed that I have like 15 million icons across the bottom. I have this addiction with Chrome. I have a thing about tabs. I use it as a task manager. So when I'm doing something, I open up new tabs, and then I set that aside and I come do something else. And eventually I come back to the other ones. So I have a lot of tabs open. I think like 130 earlier is what I saw, because I actually installed a little extension that shows me how many tabs I have open, so I have an idea of how much I need to close. So that's what that was. Closing them all and then reopening them all after a talk takes forever. So it's easier to just minimize them all, and then that's why you see 1,000 tabs there. So with that, we're getting started here a little bit late, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump into it. My name is Nathan Sweeney. I'm a senior security consultant with Secure Ideas. If you haven't heard of us, we do pen tests, ARC reviews. Buddy of mine calls me a consultant. We'll do whatever you pay us for. It's not really quite so true. I like to think we're successful enough that we can be a little more choosy about the kind of gigs we take, but anyways, I've been with them for about 5 years and really enjoy it. Is Drew in here? Awesome. All right. So we have a booth out here. Everybody's got these energy drinks right in the bags. You may like them, you may not, or whatever. Drew really likes energy drinks. And so if you have extra ones, take them by him and just say, hey man, I heard you really like these. And just, if everybody could just, if you see one laying around, just take it and give it to him. He might be able to give you a discount on a pen test. I don't know. It's worth asking. So just want to share that. I'm also a member of the B-Sides OK organizer team. Has anybody been to B-Sides OK? I know Michael has. He spoke this year. We're just down the road, like 5 hours, in Tulsa, I-40. It's not too far. So,
Texas in 5 hours.
So anyways, we'd love to have you guys, next spring. I'm the only Nathan Sweeney in the world. So if you can remember how to spell my name, you can Google me, and pretty much everything on there is about me. There was one other guy with the same name that died in the 1800s. So that's pretty much it. So this talk, we do, like I mentioned, we do pen tests. We do a lot of different types of assessments with customers, and a lot of times we get on site and we find out, hey, they have an MSSP and they want to know how they're doing, right? They're like, oh, well, we're pretty sure you're going to get caught, or we're sure they're going to detect this, or we're not sure at all. We see a wide range of abilities and capabilities. Some of them just really, really suck. Like they don't seem to be doing anything at all except taking your money. Sometimes we find out they're doing a decent job. It's not always the case that they're all bad. Sometimes they catch us right away and we start getting alerts immediately. Sometimes they supposedly catch us early on Monday, but they don't actually send any alerts until Tuesday or Wednesday. So there's some delay there. Sometimes we get feedback all week, like throughout the week, like, hey, we saw you doing this, we saw you doing this. And, when I say we get the feedback, it's usually going through our client. But so there's just a wide range of stuff. And one of the things that we've talked about internally a lot, and why I put this talk together, was how can we help people make MSSPs better? Because I can't go to them and say, hey, look, you guys suck, you need to step up your game. But I can talk to you guys who are their customers and say, here's what you can do to test them and find out how they're actually doing, how to make their products better. Because ultimately that's better for you, it's better for us, it's better for everybody. And believe it or not, as a pen tester, I like getting caught. Because when I get caught, that shows me the maturity of your security controls, and we can find out, okay, here's where you're doing great at, here's some gaps, and pivot down from there. If I never get caught, I don't know if it's because you don't have the controls in place, if you're not, they're just not deployed well, if your people aren't competent enough to monitor them, that sort of thing. So another question that come up is, if you get an alert, let's say you get alerts once in a while from your MSSP, is that all the things that are happening? Are you getting alerts and every bad thing that happens on your network you're getting an alert for? Or are you just getting some of the things they happen to catch? What if you used to get lots of alerts and now you don't get very many? Is that because you've deployed some new controls, you've invested in some additional defenses, and now things are better and so you're getting fewer alerts? Or is that because the company is not doing as well as they used to? Maybe they lost some folks, maybe they, whatever, and they're just responding more slowly, or not at all. Or maybe it's a configuration issue, and for some reason they're not actually monitoring the things you think they're monitoring. So there's a lot of questions in there. And that's kind of the goal of this talk, is I just want to walk through a process of what to look for, how to look for it, some considerations to take into this.
I mean, can you break this down by the type of MSP, like a secure word, IDS ideas versus a log management?
Yeah, so he asked if I'm going to break this down by the type of MSSP. To some degree, like I'll talk a little bit about the different types, but really I'm looking more at like the high level concepts of what types of things to think about as you're generating tests. So I'm curious for the group, how many people are security professionals? Like that's your job. Okay, how many people are more general IT? All right, management, C levels. Fair number? Okay. How many people have nothing to do with security at all? All right. I appreciate the honest guy. Hey, everybody that just laughed, he's in the front row up here learning. You guys in the back, take note. I know you're sneaking over here on the side because you want to get out if it's not a great talk. I hear you. It's my nap time too.
We try to be secure, but that's not my area of expertise.
Okay.
Keep the lights on and keep the CEO from bitching.
He just described all of our jobs. All right, let's move on. So just to kind of a level set, what is an MSSP? You've probably heard the term. If you're not quite sure what it is, it's Managed Security Service Provider. MSPs became a big thing, managed security or managed service providers, and then they added another S in there, basically for security companies to be able to distinguish themselves, or for salespeople just to have something else to say. There's a wide range of things that come into that, right? The idea is you're paying somebody else to do something for you related to security. Some common ones are IDS, log monitoring, maybe they're managing your antivirus, firewall management, vulnerability scans, incident response. I mean, really any role in security you can have somebody else do for you, and ultimately that's an MSSP. There's some other things that go into the sales model and stuff like that, but I'm not going to get into that. For the most part in this talk, I'm just going to focus on, and this is a little bit to his question, I'm just going to focus on the monitoring and alerting side of things. There's a lot of things that security providers can do that aren't necessarily, here, let us monitor for you and provide you alerts. Basically for time, I'm just going to focus on that. And then also, the concepts that I'm going to talk about don't necessarily apply just to MSSPs. They apply to your internal controls. Like, if you have a SOC, are they doing what you think they're doing, right? You've got some fairly competent people you think. Is it giving you the data that you think you're getting? These same concepts can be applied to those controls of how do you determine that you're really getting what you think you're getting. Why do people use MSPs? I like crowd feedback. Is anybody using MSSPs? How many people out there use MSSPs for something? A few? Okay. 20% maybe? 15? What's a reason? What's a reason for using an MSSP instead of doing it yourself? Staff augmentation, extension? Okay. What? Okay. Fairly common. What's that? Cost savings. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons. It was most popular. The concept started, especially managed service providers, started more at the enterprise level, but it's moved down, especially with security services, as commoditization has happened, as there's more alternatives out there. People are fighting for that small and medium business market, and so we're seeing it move further and further down. A lot of times it's lack of personnel. Maybe it's we know we need this, but we're not sure we can afford to hire somebody full time, so we're going to hire out somebody else. Sometimes it's experience or knowledge. We have people, but they're not experts in this particular area. We can't afford an expert in this area, but let's use somebody else who is an expert, and they'll just augment our people. Sometimes it's cheaper than staffing a SOC, right? You want to spin up a new SOC, but that's a lot. Like 24/7 monitoring, that takes several people, and that's a big spin up. So maybe use somebody else temporarily until you can get your own stuff going. Sometimes it's a package deal. You buy some service or system or group of services, and all these other things come with it. There's a lot of different reasons. Does anybody use a third party provider just so they have somebody to blame if there's something going wrong? Yeah, that guy's honest. I had a CIO tell me that. He's like, very specifically, we use them because we had a problem, and the guy before me, the CIO before me, he got fired because his people weren't doing the job he thought they were doing. And so I outsource everything I can. That way my neck's not on the line. I think that's kind of a faulty logic there, but who knows. So there's several different types of monitoring and alerting services. I want to walk through just a couple of them to make sure everybody's kind of on the same page. Network IDS is really common, and not necessarily just IDS, but network-based services. Usually that's some type of hardware device that's going to go on the network. I'm thinking internal, wherever your checkpoints are. You've done segmentation, and you're going to put something at the checkpoints to monitor the stuff going back and forth. Usually that's a signature-based type thing. More recently it might be a behavioral monitoring type system. On the perimeter, kind of an extension of the network, we have a few different other types of services that people watch for on the perimeter. I think data exfiltration, right? What's going in, what's going out. DLP services, that kind of thing. Obviously IPS and IDS falls in there. Malicious traffic tunneling, if we have some type of malware in our system and now it's monitoring out, sometimes your MSSP might be monitoring for that sort of thing. Endpoint security. So, we've got a wide range of different services. Everybody's trying to come up with the next best thing for monitoring endpoints. Antivirus is the easy historical one that everybody knows about. Having antivirus is great, but if you're not monitoring the alerts that are coming back for it, if you don't know, hey, this system hasn't checked in, like the AV has been disabled for 6 months. Is anybody going to notice that sort of thing? There's a lot of solutions out there, but a lot of people look at it and just like, hey, it's easier to have somebody else manage that for me. Host-based IDSs, that sort of thing. How many people are using some form of next-gen antivirus, next-gen endpoint protection? I'm a big fan of these. Not that many. I know they're really, really expensive. I think I saw CrowdStrike's booth. Is anybody from CrowdStrike in here? All right, I'm not going to say anything bad about them, I promise. I actually really like them. I've never personally used it, but we've got several clients that use CrowdStrike, and it sucks. They catch everything. If somebody's actively monitoring the solutions and stuff like that, it's amazing how much they can detect as far as malicious activity on the network. Now, there's some pretty significant hiccups in getting it set up and doing all that, but having people monitor, that's great. What else we got? And I'll mention too, a lot of places are combining these. So for instance, I think I saw WatchGuard out there. You go talk to the WatchGuard folks for a few minutes and they'll tell you about how they're combining the endpoint security with the network security and they've got all this correlation. I don't know how much of that is magic sales talk and how much of it's legit, but they're trying, right? They're all trying to differentiate their products. I'm sure SonicWall and FortiGate and Palo Alto is all doing the same thing. And then log correlation, that's another very, very common one. A lot of people, hey, does anybody like to look at logs? This guy, I knew his hat says log MD, right? I mean, most everyone else, I think other than Michael, I think the other 6 billion, 7 billion people in the world hate looking at logs. It's exhausting, it's time consuming, a lot of times you don't know what you're looking for. There's some hassle there, and so having an organization do that for you is really helpful. But there's all kinds of issues that can come up there. Maybe they're looking at all the logs in the organization, maybe they're not. What happens if a device stops supporting it? All that. We're going to talk about some more examples here in a few minutes. So, why do MSSPs fail? And as I said before, they don't all the time. I worked in my previous job, I worked for a company that sold some security services. Not a lot. We focused mostly on the point of sale industry in Oklahoma. And we had, several hundred clients. And, just like a lot of people that get into that industry, we thought, hey, here's some security services that we can sell pretty easily. We buy some tools over here. We deploy these. Now all these customers, we can charge them a little bit extra every month and bring in more revenue. It's a really common thing. There are some things that we did really great. Some things we didn't do so well. Now, 10 years later, I can stand up here and tell you about that. At the time, you can't go to your customers and say, hey, here's where we really suck and you need to watch out for. But that's kind of part of the impetus for this talk is just explaining why that happens. Sometimes the reasons they fail is that it's just hard to scale. Like they start out, they're doing a great job, they have a good organization, they've got good people, and then they get maybe a little bit successful and it's hard to ramp up and bring on more people. Maybe it's hard to bring on more customers. It sounds weird, but being too successful for a service provider can actually be a bad thing sometimes if they're not able to handle it. Sometimes they're too unsuccessful, right? It's the other side. They don't have enough business coming in to be able to hire the competent people that they need or enough of them, and so they let people go and they don't replace them, or maybe they hire somebody who's substandard, and now you have people that are doing the job that maybe aren't quite as good, maybe they're not monitoring things as well, maybe the configurations and stuff like that, the deployment is not being, efforts not being put into place in that. Poor management is another part of that. There's all kinds of reasons that businesses don't do well. All of these fall under MSSPs fall under all of these. Sometimes it's just sheer incompetence. Has anybody ever talked to a service provider or tech support from some company that you work with that the guy's just completely incompetent? Yeah. Okay, the rest of you guys are asleep now, right? Yeah, 2:30. It's nap time. What's that? When they treat you like you're incompetent. Yeah, exactly.
That's probably more so than
Yeah.
I don't realize some of those customers are a little bit more advanced than
What's the secret word you're supposed to be able to tell people that they'll know you're a technical person? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? What's that? Star Trek? No, it's from a comic strip or something, I think like 10 years ago. Somebody said, it was like a XCKD or something like that, XKCD, where like they said, hey, if you're on tech support and you give them this word, they'll know you're a competent person, and then they'll like forward you up to like level 3 or something like that. Somebody's gonna have to find that. Get your phone out and find that while we're talking. No, don't. Pay attention to me. So, what I want to help you figure out how to do is how to test your MSSPs. And I'm going to say not necessarily just your MSSPs, but test your controls. How to find out that whether it's a service provided by somebody else or whether it's something you do yourself, test your stuff to make sure you're actually getting out of it what you think you're getting. If you haven't tested it, it doesn't work. That was something I was taught years ago about backups. If you haven't tested it, it doesn't work. Don't just assume that it's out there. Some things to think about is what are your MSSPs supposed to do? Yeah, I'm going to move on. So, some things to expect. What should you expect? First off, think about the types of controls, right? What do you have? What services are you being provided? What do you expect them to be able to give you? You would not believe how many times that we talk to like a C-level person on a kickoff call, and they're like, oh yeah, the MSSP is doing this and this. And then we talk to like the technical person afterwards, and they're like, no, that's not happening. I did a pen test 2 weeks ago for a really large credit union. Hopefully nobody's in here from them. But the CIO was like convinced that he's like, yeah, you're going to start scanning on Monday and we really want to test out this MSSP. We want to make sure they're going to catch you. And I'm like, sometimes that works out, but what ends up happening a lot is we start scanning. They may or may not get an alert. Maybe they block our IP, and then they don't notice it. And finally, we call them and say, hey, our IP's be blocked. Can you whitelist this now? So you verify that so that we can start scanning again. Maybe they don't respond because they're in a meeting. Now it's the end of the day, and we finally get things whitelisted. We start some scanning again, and now we've lost a full day of testing. So that was my concern. I'm like, oh, what's going to happen here? This is going to be a hassle. We should have talked about this ahead of time. Afterwards, we get off the phone call, and the technical contact calls me. And he was like, you know what, don't worry about any of that. They're not doing any blocking. Like, they're not even hardly monitoring anything. The CIO just hasn't paid attention to any of the briefings we've had, so he doesn't know where we stand on that project. Like, that's a situation where, who do you think's talking to the auditors, right? When they're saying, okay, what are you doing for security? What are you doing to protect these things? It's the C-level that's making those decisions and saying, here's what we've got, here's what we're doing. And he doesn't necessarily know what's going on. So if you're that level of management, you need to be aware of hey, you've put some faith in these controls. What are they actually doing? What types of controls? No, absolutely. I'm saying you should test them and verify that from that, what my point on that was, if you're in management, you need to make sure that you're paying attention that I think I have this control. Make sure that it really is working. And if that means deploying your own people to go out and test this and verify that it's working, that's great. If it means just listening to your people and making sure that when they tell you no, it's not working, and then you go say, yeah, this is great, we're using this. I don't want to berate C-levels much, but we get that sometimes.
I'm a C-level.
Okay. And I imagine you were the best one in the room. So pretty damn good. How are alerts generated? When an incident happens, how are you supposed to get that? Do you know that? Is there a specific contact you're supposed to get it? Does it go to an email address of a guy who left 3 years ago and nobody's has his forwarded email anymore? You need to know how those are coming. Response time. How quickly should you get alerts? Are they monitoring every 3 hours? And, if something happens, they'll let you know during the next cycle. Are they monitoring? Are you supposed to get like within 5 minutes or 15 minutes? That sort of thing. I said notifications, and I have no idea how Oh, I got those backwards. So I talked about how alerts generated earlier. I was talking about notifications. How are alerts generated is more of what types of things should be triggering alerts, right? Do you have a plan? Do you have a list of things? Here's our minimum. Now, there's always going to be things that maybe they catch that you didn't think about, but you should have a bare minimum list of things that should be caught, right? If I transfer a bunch of NTLM hashes over your network and it goes through an IDS, that should be on your list of things that should be caught. Somebody, if they're doing any job at all, they should be able to see, hey, this somebody's transferring NTLMs in clear text, something's going on. That's the kind of thing you can watch for. Something else to be considered when you think about notifications and response time is, actually my next point. Do they have an escalation process? What is the process for, something happens and an event occurs that you should get an alert. Maybe they contact you via email and then nobody responds. Do they have a point where after 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, they pick up the phone and call you? Like, what is that escalation time? Those are the types of things that you need to know and keep in your expectations. And then finally, what are they monitoring? If it's a network IDS, what parts of the network is it on? Are they monitoring? Like we did a kind of a red team review assessment with it's kind of a red team, blue team thing with a SOC for a large energy company, and we basically sat down with them. We had a team at one of their plants, and then we were sitting with the SOC, and so they didn't know about the other team. So the other team was out generating events, and we were sitting with the SOC watching how they responded and what they saw and what they didn't see and that sort of thing. One of the things we found out was that a significant number of systems that they thought they were monitoring, they weren't getting any alerts for, and they had no idea. So that's the kind of thing that you need to know before you start testing. Everything on this list, you need to know what to expect so that then you can assess whether or not they're really doing what you think they should be doing. I apologize to everybody on this side of the room. I'm just talking over here because I don't know why. So what to test? And I'm going to kind of walk through the different types of stuff we talked about a little bit before. On the network, there's several different types of things you can do. These are practical examples of things you can do to test whether or not that you're getting alerts. And what you really could do is take notes of these are the types of things that you should make sure that they're catching, right? If somebody's monitoring things. A port scan should be pretty easy to detect. If you've got any kind of IDS, any kind of thing on a network, they should be able to monitor or detect a port scan. Vulnerability scans, the same type of thing. There's all types of different scanners out there. It doesn't matter whether it's Nmap or Masscan, Nexpose or Nessus or whatever. They should be able to detect those types of scans. Now, if you want to get really fancy, you can start doing some of the more complicated scans. Nmap has the normal TCP and UDP and SYN scans and all this, but you can also do like the Xmas scans and, the different ones from there that kind of mix around the different flags on the packets that go through. My recommendation is start simple and then work up from there and make sure that you're getting the alerts from the simple stuff. Yep.
In this case, as I working like this test, if you're on the same segment, so let's say you pop a box and you scan that segment, those workstations are on. If it doesn't traverse the firewall and or the port that the IDS is monitoring, you will not test.
Yeah, absolutely.
So make sure you're testing where that pop is occurring.
Yeah, and I don't know if you heard in the back, Michael's comment was, if you're on the same segment and you're scanning another system on that segment and it's not traversing wherever your monitoring point is, you're not going to detect it. So that's where, going back to the previous one about knowing where that monitoring is happening, that sort of thing. Some other examples, spray attacks. This is something that should happen. Password attacks is an easy one. One of the first things that I do when I get on the network, a lot of times if we do an internal test, we simulate what a compromised workstation would have access to. And so a compromised workstation, you're usually going to have generic domain credentials. We tell people, hey, give us non-privileged standard domain credentials. If you hired a new person in accounting and they sat down, what would they have access to? Or Susie and marketing or whatever. Give us just generic domain credentials and let's see what they can do from inside. One of the first things that I would do is connect to Active Directory, download a list of all active users who aren't disabled, and then I'm going to run a password spraying attack saying test spring 2018, what year are we? Against all of the accounts in the domain. I did this just the other day. There's like 1,000 accounts and we tested spring 2018 and then summer 2018 and then May 2018 exclamation point because May is only 3 letters. Because most people have an 8-character password, and we'd check the password policy first and that sort of thing. But what ends up happening is you have for each user, only a couple of attempts, right? And so a lot of monitoring solutions, they'll notice that, hey, we see some stuff going, but it's not tripping the limit. Whereas if they're monitoring, hey, there's 5,000 password attempts in a period of 5 minutes, that's something they should be able to detect. And this is focusing on network, but you can do the same thing with log monitoring as well. Crack Map Exec. Is everybody familiar with Crack Map? I can't even say it. Crack Map Exec. Is anybody not? I'm getting a lot of shakes. Okay. This is a great tool. It's incredibly fast. Basically what it does is you provide credentials and you give it a range or a list of systems or whatever, and you say, go tell me what I have access to. And you can use the -- shares. And what it'll do is it'll connect to every Windows system in that list. And if you're wanting to play with this, I recommend doing like an nmap scan or mass scan for everything listening on 445, because that's what it's going to try to connect over SMB. And it'll try to connect to every one of them, and it'll give you a list of all the file shares on that box, but it'll also tell you which ones you have local admin on. That's a big step up for if you have standard domain user account but doesn't have local admin. You run this against an entire network, and I say, oh wait, here's 4 boxes now that I know this account has local admin on. Now I can pivot to those boxes and start going from there. But that's the same type of thing. This is going to result in potentially thousands and thousands of SMB requests across lots and lots of boxes. So that's something that you can run easily and determine whether or not that's being detected. Man-in-the-middle types of attacks, there's lots of different ways of monitoring for this. If you don't know what a gratuitous ARP is, that's the way you do what's called ARP cache poisoning, where I'm this computer here and I tell the router I'm you and I tell you that I'm the router. You send it a gratuitous ARP packet. There's very, very few use cases in a normal operating network for gratuitous ARP packets. So normally when you start seeing like something about that, there's something suspicious going on. That's something that you should be able to detect, if you're monitoring on that segment where you have access to that sort of stuff. And then I mentioned different indicators of compromise. I mentioned earlier like extracting hashes and stuff like that if you're pulling stuff across the network. Some ideas for on the endpoint, if you've got people that are monitoring your systems from an endpoint perspective, any kind of privilege escalation, adding users to privileged groups. That's not necessarily just on the endpoint. That kind of applies on the domain as well. But, you should have certain groups. If somebody gets added to the local administrators group, that should probably generate an alert, unless that's a regular thing. And if it's a regular thing, you probably have some other issues to think about. Any kind of tampering on the endpoint, disabling AV, modifying configuration files. There's a lot of different things. Think like an attacker. Like, what's the kind of things that an attacker is going to do? Maybe installing new drivers. Anything like that happens that you can monitor or that they can monitor. These are the types of things you should know. And I'll tell you, most MSSPs, like if they're monitoring your endpoint control systems, you might do one of these and come back to them and say, hey, you didn't detect this. And they may be like, well, no, we don't have the ability to detect that. Well, now you have a bargaining point where you'd be like, well, what can you do to add that? Or is that something I need to go talk to your competitors and see if they have the abilities? That sort of thing. Unusual system commands. So most of you are pretty technical. You're going to use PowerShell. You might use WMIC maybe. Some of you still might use net. But your average user is not going to do that. Right? If you're monitoring your network and the average user opens up or runs a net command, net use or whatever, net user, net group, net local group, there's probably something going on. Now, sometimes those are legitimate, but if you get alerts for those, that's a great way to keep track of, finding bad guys pretty quickly. PowerShell is the same type of thing. More and more stuff is using PowerShell, but for the most part, it still tends to be IT-focused people. So if you can monitor certain groups and say, you know what, these people, if we see these, I'm not so concerned about that alert, but if we see it in these other groups, then maybe there's something significant going on.
That is, I used to chase the Chinese in the gaming industry. That is the #1 alert in log management you want to create. And I'll actually be publishing a list of, there's a link to the application whitelisting bypasses. But I have a large list that I use in Splunk and or equivalent that when these execute in quantity, we analyze other people's APT reports, they'll type at least a dozen of these commands in the course of their attack. It is the #1 alert you could possibly put in log management.
If you can't hear that in the back, Michael Goff up here saying that's the #1 thing to watch for, APT or nation state or any types of attacks where they're focusing on stuff. What's your website, Michael?
Malwarearchaeology.com.
Malwarearchaeology.com. So if you're interested in some of this stuff, go look that up, and he's going to publish a list. Or have you already published it, or are you planning on it?
I'm in the process of it.
Okay, so he'll have a list of some of those types of things to watch
I'll
for.
mention a bit tomorrow. I have a talk at 10 o'clock.
Go to his talk at 10 o'clock. Free advertising there. Really, that's the only reason he goes to talks today is just to throw that out there in the middle of it. Yes, sir.
I know you guys talk about logging everything.
Uh-huh.
Cool with that, but do you have any suggestions throughout the talk, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, but to eliminate white noise or alert fatigue?
That go to his talk, yeah.
Right here.
His question was, how do you, with logging and stuff, how do you eliminate white noise and log fatigue and all that kind of stuff? That's a little bit outside of the scope of this talk, but I'm sure he'll cover it well.
Well,
So-
when we run tests, I'll get 5,000 emails a day.
Yeah.
To the point where it's like, all right, anything from this source delete.
Exactly.
Don't care.
And that's what you got to be careful about
You
that.
gotta tune your log management stuff. Malware kills and stuff is designed to help you with that. I understand that. But that's a key concept. This is normal. If it's running on 1,000 of my machine, I've got 1,000 machines. That's not the droid I'm looking for.
Right.
Filter that out.
Yep.
So your alerts go down to when he triggers something, suddenly, you got 5 or 6 of them. And then you know something's wrong.
No, I'm saying when my security guy hits our systems, I get 5,000.
Yeah.
He gets very prolific.
All right, let me move on. So talking about perimeter stuff, DLP, obviously, right, if you have somebody that's monitoring to see when Social Security cards or Social Security numbers are sent out of your data network, have you actually tested that to see? You know, if you're monitoring to see if credit card data can be caught going out, have you actually tested that to see, can I send stuff out without it being caught? And then it comes into how do you test? You know, are there different ways that maybe you can test that? Command and control tunnels, things like Metasploit or PowerShell Empire, you know, different types of systems like that communicate out, kind of a command and control back and forth. Can you monitor and catch that kind of stuff? More advanced stuff like DNS tunneling, ICMP tunneling. There's different ways that you can facilitate traffic going in and out of a network. So these are types of things that you can test. It's relatively easy. I didn't list all the different open source stuff out there, but any one of these things, if you said, hey, I want to test DNS tunneling, go to Google and type in DNS tunneling tool, and I guarantee you'll come up with a couple of different examples of tools out there that are relatively easy to set up to test these kind of things. Malicious outbound traffic, torrents, Tor, spam. I mean, these aren't necessarily security issues. It could be a legitimate user trying to do something, but it's something that you should be able to test and determine whether or not that kind of stuff is being detected. And then web application attacks, especially on the perimeter. If you're hosting a website of some kind, what happens if you send a cross-site scripting attack, right? Even if you know the application's not vulnerable, are you getting alerts? Because I guarantee you, if you have the ability to start getting alerts when some of those attacks come in, then you know, hey, we have an option to do something about this. Now, you might get so many of them, and you're like, well, there's nothing we can do. Or you might just get a few, and you say, okay, we can shun those IPs, or we can do different stuff there. So having the information to know, you know, let's test this and see what we get, will let you then decide how to proceed and react. Talking about logs a little bit. So really all of the above. Everything we talked about generates logs of some kind. One of the things that comes into logs is, are they actually getting the logs that we think they're getting? We had an organization that had, they were breached. It was you would know the name, a very, very large breach. And we went in and worked with them to try to figure out what happened. And they're like, well, we have this MSSP that's monitoring our IDS, and they never detected any of this traffic. And so we get on the phone with them, and we're starting looking at them, and then we're like, well, can you send us what you have? And they're like, we have nothing. What do you mean? Like just send us the raw logs. And like, well, we have nothing. Like, we have no logs. Well, what are you talking about? Like, we've been paying you for 3 years to monitor this. Well, when they set up the IDS systems, I don't remember, they got it on the wrong segment, or somehow there was a configuration issue, and like literally nothing was being sent to this MSSP. They were charging thousands of dollars a month, at least, I don't remember how much it was, to monitor nothing. The organization never noticed. Like, they never said, hey, it's been 3 years and we've never gotten a single alert. Maybe we should check that out. That's the kind of thing to pay attention to. Tampering, has somebody messed with the logs? Would they detect that if you go in there and screw around with stuff? There's lots of different ways of doing that. Yes? I'm sure, yeah. I'm sure. I guess that depends on their contract. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't deal with that. Even if it's not a breach of concept, I would think there would be at least a negligence, like a civil lawsuit issue that you could pursue. But I don't know. I stay as far away from that kind of stuff as I can. So, you know, what's showing up? What about denial of service? what if I create this gentleman's point, if I make 5,000 logs appear of relatively benign stuff so that you don't notice the one thing I'm doing? Like, can they handle that, right? And you might really give some SOC folks a bad day, but what if I go through and generate a whole bunch of seemingly legit looking stuff and then something else that's really bad and then see if I get the alerts from that sort of stuff? Something to do before you do that type of thing, and really any kind of testing, is to understand your contract with the MSSP and recognize what you're allowed to do and what not, right? If you do something that causes issues for them and they come back and say, well, you violated the contract because of this, be aware of what your requirements are. So some specific things about how to test. The first off is to be creative. Think like an attacker. And if you can't do that, because legitimately some people can't, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I actually think that says something about people's personality that's probably better than me. But some of us are born to think like an attacker, and either hire that person or find somebody that you can say, go watch talks like this and say, what are different ways that maybe we could do something that's outside the box that somebody wouldn't think of? Especially as you mature in this process. As you've been testing for a while and they're finding everything, try to find new and creative ways to bypass controls or to get around stuff that maybe they didn't. And it doesn't have to be a mean, like, ha ha ha, we got past you. It's a, hey, we discovered that you're not detecting this. Is there something that you can do to add that ability in there? Also be realistic. Don't be crazy. You know what I mean? It's like, you can, if you're an attacker, you're an intelligent person, you can come up with a way to get around a control eventually, right? With enough time, enough persistence, you're going to come, we shut down the local power company and all the power went out in this 3-state area and we were able to sneak this USB drive out, whatever. Like, that's not realistic. By the way, I don't have time for this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. So, in high school, somebody told me one time there's two types of people. There's the kind of people that see the armored cars go by and they try to imagine, how would I break into that car? And then there's the kind of people that lie about not having thought about that. Like, how many people admit that they've thought about how to break into an armored car? All right. So there's a fair number of liars in here still. No, I do think there's some innocent people that just don't think about that. But I've come up with several different ways. Most of them are not realistic. But I'm not going to go into those because we're being recorded, and I just realized I don't want that on YouTube. So, oh yeah. My solution would make a great movie, and it would not be worth it unless there was just something amazing in there. That diamond off of Titanic. All right, so be careful. Careful with how you use credentials, right? If you say, hey, we're going to take some network hashes, some password hashes, and we're going to pass them over the network and see if anybody detects these being passed in clear text. Are those actual credentials? Are they sensitive? Don't send your domain admin password and, even if it's just a hash. Be careful about how you're doing that. Be responsible. Think through the types of attack traffic you're going to throw around. And also things like crack map exec. That's a great tool, but for it to actually be effective, you need to give it credentials on those systems, even if it's just standard domain credentials. Well, now you're sending those domain credentials all over the network. So just be aware of that. Think that through. Also be smart. Is Vanessa Hudgens in the room? I'm going to guess no. All right. So I used to say that nobody looks good in an orange jumpsuit. And then Vanessa Hudgens, she's like a young starlet. I don't really know for sure. But she came on the Jimmy Kimmel Show in an orange jumpsuit suit. So I said that at a talk. I said, nobody looks good in an orange jumpsuit. And some guy right here in the front row was like, yeah, Vanessa Hudgens does. And he pulled it up and he's showing, I'm like, okay, I have to admit. So if you're not Vanessa Hudgens, you probably don't look good in an orange jumpsuit. Make sure that you have permission before you do any of this testing, because you're talking about attacking your network. When I say test the services are there to monitor for attacks. You are talking about attacking your network. Make sure you have permission. Make sure you know what you're doing. I don't want you emailing me and saying, hey, I got fired because I did what you said. I'm going to say, you're an idiot. I'm sorry. I won't say you're an idiot. I'll be nice. I'm nice. Lastly, be gracious. You're testing somebody else. And we deal with this a lot because a lot of people, when we come in to do a pen test, they see it as am I going to 250? I'm out of time. No, it says I got 12 minutes. I'm going to go with that. All right. 7 minutes ahead of where it should be. Does that mean I have 5 minutes or 19?
Just keep going.
I'm going to go with 5. All right, we're just going to rush through. Anyways, be nice to people. If you're going to catch people messing up or maybe not doing their job, be gracious about it. I was tempted to call these the Beatitudes, and I thought I'll get struck by lightning or something, so I'm not going to do that. All right, so when to test, some specific things to think about. Either test at specific times. We want to test at a downtime where it's not going to impact business, or we don't want to, deal with that. Or we're going to test at random times. We want to really throw everything out at the MSSP and see if they notice. Are you going to test at really busy times and see if they catch stuff when everything's busy? Or are you going to test at slow times where, it's not going to cause other issues? Those are things to take into effect. What I recommend is when you start, test with the easiest, maybe slow times at specific times after hours or something like that. And then maybe once you've been doing it a while, ramp up to the other. Are you going to do it all at once, or are you going to spread out? If your goal is just say, here, let's run through 15 different types of attacks and let's see what we get alerts on. That's a valid test. It's going to be pretty clear that, to them that you're doing something, but that's a valid test. Or you can spread it out. We're going to do a random attack once a week throughout, the next 6 weeks and just see what they detect on. That might be valuable too. So there's several commercial products. I've been talking about this for several years, this idea of doing this, but I never really did anything about it. And I got to looking to see what's out there. And there's Attack IQ came up with it. They released a product in 2013, Verodin in 2014, Safe Breach in 2014, VTech in 2014. Like I said, several years, about the same time I started talking about this. I'm guessing I got the idea from somebody else because I don't think I'm that smart. But all these other companies basically developed products doing the same type of thing and got like millions of dollars in venture capitalist money. I really screwed this up is what I'm saying. These guys are probably great. I have no idea. I don't know anything about any of them. If you have the money, if you work for the government, it might be worthwhile to get some demos of them and try them out. But what I'm trying to do is kind of help you, at least give you the tools to be able to do it yourself if you can't afford that. Look at some open source options. So Nessie 2 was started in 2008 to do the same thing. Those guys were way ahead of the ball. The project died in 2014. And it was made in Java. Nobody cares. It's pretty much dead. No, I was wrong. That wasn't made in Java. Atomic Red Team. That was another one that's out there. Looks all right. The last update from it was also in 2014. So it looks like it's fairly dead. That one's in Java. And it's massive. It was like these Swedish guys that it's a huge overkill for really what you need. Another thing to look at is the Mightor attack framework. Is anybody familiar with the attack framework? Good. Fair number of hands. This is a great project. Basically what they've done is they've put together a wide range of different types of attacks and ways that you can test for different types of things like we're talking about. I was going to pull up the website and show you a little bit, but I think we're kind of low on time. So this is basically an idea of what you're looking at. When you pull it up, you guys can't see any of this, but like on the left, it says initial access, and you have things like drive-by compromise, hardware additions, spear phishing attachment, supply chain compromise. You've got execution, persistence, privilege escalation, and then under each one of those categories, you have different specific types of attacks. You can go to the website and find all of these. All of these are links. And so when you click on any one of these, it pulls up a description of the attack, some tools that you can use, mostly open source tools that you can use to actually test those types of things, and then some details of things that you should watch out for and that sort of thing. This is an amazing resource. And so if you're wanting to do it all what I've been talking about today, go here and this will walk through a bunch of it.
There's also an API where you can copy down just the categories and things you want. So if you're looking for something very specific, you can crawl the API and pull just the rows of the columns.
Yeah, if you didn't have that in the back, they have an API where you can be specific and pull down different things. I think there's some tools out there that are working towards doing this type of thing with that API. I haven't seen any of them that are mature enough that I would recommend, but there's a lot of people talking about this general idea out there. So anyway, that's what's out there. Some other things. Oh, I ended up with an extra. There's the link, attack.mightor.org. Some other things, if you want to do this yourself, some things to consider. I'm just going to throw these out here. Anybody out here could develop a project, right? You start writing and, come up with something internally, come up with some ideas. Think about your target audience. Is this just for you? Is it for everybody? How is it going to be used? Low cost, high cost, how do you do things? How easy is it to deploy? A couple of the other open source projects I mentioned earlier are not easy to deploy. That one out of Sweden is massive. I think it requires like 32 gigs of RAM on the box just to get started on the basic thing. And it's 2014 was when it died. So, but anyways, making it flexible. Are you going to have a somebody has to manually go run these things or have like an agent type console type design. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could take into consideration. If somebody's looking, I always like when I see an idea for a project, I wish I had time to do it, but I don't. But if somebody's looking for something to deploy and create something, this would be a great idea in my opinion. And there's obviously a lot of venture capitalist money out there to throw at it. So, and then automation, and of course you always have to have an awesome name. So that's pretty much it. Any questions or anything else? Nothing. Yes, ma'am.
So when I was looking at one of the challenges that I had was, what are you monitoring? I'm trying to get out of them what they're monitoring. I've talked to things as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 7.5 years. We work in them. We know that they're monitoring. But these people don't want to provide that information. We found out because of user costs. Either they don't know it's not configured correctly, or they don't want to share it.
Mm. Yeah, so the lady's question is, when you're dealing with an MSSP and you say, hey, what are you monitoring? And they aren't able to provide an answer, either because they don't know or because they don't want to give it up or whatever. I haven't dealt with that directly because I'm more on the other side of the pen tester coming in. I think that to some degree is a sales process thing. I don't give salespeople a lot of flack. If they can't provide me the info, then I'll go to one of their competitors and find the info. I think more often than not, it's because they don't know. Because they probably don't have, they may have somebody who has configured their Splunk instance and they've got everything set up, but they don't have, people don't ask those kind of questions. Don't give me a list of everything you detect. Well, that's hard, blah, blah, blah. That's where I would maybe say, hey, can I get a sales engineer on the phone? And let's talk a little bit more detail. And if you can't, then have a nice day. Oh, the engineers can't do it? Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, and that, you can do that. You don't have to give them here's the things we tested. You can set up a proof of concept and then run through and do some of these testing like we're talking about, and then just see what they alert you on. You don't have to give them the test and say, here's what we tested, we're waiting for these alerts. They'll be like, oh yeah, we saw that, here it is.
They didn't come in, and then when I said, what the hell are you even looking at? And they just looked at me with crickets, and I was like, okay, you're gone.
Yeah, and that's exactly kind of why I'm talking about this. There's a lot of that out there. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So as a pen tester, I have two questions. One is to give them a report of what type of thing you did when, so they go back and log stuff and look at it. And then two, as part of a debrief, you walk with the service to go back with them and say, okay, here's what we were running. You want us to, we'll sit here and run this for half an hour, and you should try to fine tune, or we should try to help you fine tune how to protect it.
Yeah. So his question was, during a pen test, do we actually give them a list of here's everything we tested and did you see this or that? And then afterwards, do we go back and refine, or, help them clean it up and refine it and stuff like that? Or offer that. We don't offer remediation stuff just as a company. I don't like to do it. Most of my coworkers, we don't like to, it's more fun to break stuff. There's lots of people that can help you fix it. Like Michael. But, the other part of it is, we don't like to say, here, this is a problem that you have. Oh, by the way, we can fix it for you. And there's just a little bit of conflict of interest potential, and we try to stay out of that. But as far as telling them what we're testing as we go, one of the things that we try really hard to do, well, yeah, that's where I was going with that is one of the things that we try to do is communicate as the testing is happening. So, let's talk about it. Hey, today, Monday finished up and here's what we did. How much of this did you see? Oh, we didn't see any of that. Okay, well, here's some things you can do to maybe look into that. Yeah, and so.
Many of them just do, here's your results.
Yeah.
And after release them, it's kind of like, well, that doesn't do any good to tell them, teach them how to fix it.
Exactly. I have another talk that I've given, and I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere, about how to make a pen test more of an educational opportunity. It doesn't have to just be, let's go in and break your stuff and give you a $20,000 report that you never look at again. It can be let's bring all your people in the same room and let's sit around and talk about here's what we're doing. What are you seeing? Okay, here's how you can improve that. What if we do this? Oh, well, this will stop that. Okay, let's try it. Like, you can have that back and forth. It can be a collaborative exercise, and there's a lot more value. Especially if PCI, you have to pay for it anyway. Let's get something good out of it than just a paper report.
That's kind of what I meant, because actually it's twofold. One is they're learning how to track what you're doing, and you're learning how to do it maybe a different way, or make them learn something different that you didn't do the first time. So, hey, I learned another step.
Absolutely.
I'll go try that at the next place I go to.
Yep. I think they haven't kicked me off, but I'm going to go ahead and jump off. If you have questions, follow up with me afterwards. Do I have to be done? All right, I'm done.
Hey, before everybody